In higher ed, I usually describe the coalition model as think about a big R1 where you have a college of arts and sciences, a college of education, a college of engineering, but there's one shared graduate school. That is sort of what we've set up here, where there can be an Otterbein in Ohio and there can be another kind of Otterbein-like school in other states.
Welcome. Small College America is a podcast dedicated to exploring the role and value of small colleges in the U.S. higher education landscape. We focus on the impact these institutions have on students and communities, as well as the challenges they face and the opportunities that help them thrive.
Very good. Today on Small College America, we're thrilled to have two fantastic people who have been talking about this across the country for quite some time. Let me introduce first Wendy Sherman Heckler, who is Provost and Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs for Otterbein University. And with her is her colleague and friend, Chet Haskell, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs and University Provost at Antioch University. Their institution's founded in 2023, a concept called the Coalition for Common Good, an innovative national education system that's driving a new model for collaboration and partnership. And before we get deep into this, why don't we introduce you to a little bit, and how did you get to where you get to in terms of your respective institutions? What brought you there? Wendy, why don't you start off?
Sure. Thank you, Dean. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I come from Otterbein University, as you said. We are very much, I am guessing, like your audience members, small college just outside of Columbus, Ohio, in the city of Westerville, Ohio. We are a traditional residential, primarily undergraduate institution. Most of our programs are face-to-face. We pride ourselves on our relationships with students. We pride ourselves on our commitment to access and affordability. We pride ourselves on our innovative pedagogy. I'm sure this is familiar to a lot of your audience members. And I would say we got to the point of talking about and forming the Coalition for the Common Good because we know the business model of higher education needs to change. Demographics and the winds of change are against small schools like Otterbein, and we knew that we wanted to do something a little bit different, and I know that's what we're going to delve into a little bit more today. I don't know, I've been at Otterbein for this is year 18 and the last 8 years in the provost seat. So
very good. Chet, why don't you do a little bit of introduction yourself, and how did you get to this point?
Well, Antioch is a very different institution, and we're fundamentally a graduate institution in graduate professional degrees. We're about 3,800 students, depending what you count on a given day. Our largest set of programs are what we call counseling, psychology, and therapy. These are the behavioral sciences at both the master's level and at the doctoral level. We also have smaller programs in leadership and change, environmental studies, graduate education, and the MFA, things like that. But we don't have undergraduates in the traditional sense. We have a degree completion undergraduate program, which is just what it sounds like. About half of our degree completion students go on to graduate school somewhere, and half of that group go on to graduate school with us. So it's a pretty flexible, pretty interesting program where the average age of those students is in the late 20s, early 30s. So it's very different institutions, very different priorities. I've been here for 6.5 years after a lengthy career in other parts of higher education and find it fascinating, in part because both Antioch and Otterbein share a bunch of interests, including most importantly, I think, we share mission, and it's expressed in the Coalition for the Common Good. So,
Very good. Kent, why don't you go ahead?
You bet. I think our listeners would really benefit. I know the two of you talk about this a lot, and there's certainly awareness, but could you explain for our listeners what exactly is the Coalition for Common Good, and how does it differ from a traditional merger. I think that our listeners will be very interested in that. And then maybe to tack on to that, after both of you have helped us understand those two things, why did you choose this model over other collaborative options that exist in this world of mergers, acquisitions, alliances? How did you choose this? So I don't know, Chet, would you like to start? And then Wendy, you can help fill in the blanks.
Sure.
Well, Antioch got into the discussion of this about 5 years ago when we were faced with issues related. How do we continue to grow with a limited endowment, with limited resources, and needing investment? And we said we have to have a partner or partners. That eventually led us to Otterbein. I think the question here about what's the model, there isn't one. It's not a merger. Nobody's merged. We are separately accredited, separate IPED academic institutions. But we obviously are collaborating on a whole bunch of things, and we can talk about that more. At the other end of the spectrum, we're not a consortium. But when you think about consortia, they share various things, et cetera, but the institutions remain completely separate and independent in terms of a legal status. We fundamentally now have the the two institutions that what amounts to a coalition board sort of over us all. And the goal here is over time to grow this away from a bilateral relationship into a multilateral relationship. We are in, and we'll discuss this later, we're in those discussions already. But where each institution would maintain its separate identity, separate status, so forth. And we do a lot of co-branding and we do things of that sort, but they're independent institutions.
Yeah, I'm going to speak from Otterbein's perspective, and Chet alluded to this in his answer to the first question. So, we small schools can't be everything to everyone, and yet we are constantly trying to do that. Just ask any of our faculty, any of our institutions, and they will tell you that that is how, that's what's ending up happening. And so Chet mentioned earlier, we are puzzle pieces. We really do complement each other. We are different and complementary institutions. And so I would say, Otterbein had been exploring partnerships with other schools since roughly, maybe a year or so before COVID hit. And we had looked at all kinds of models that are out there. We've been working with, talking to other schools, working with consultants. And it wasn't until we started talking to Antioch that suddenly, oh, we could do something different here. We don't have to think about merging. We don't have to think about one school, absorbing the other one. We can actually divide and conquer. And so in higher ed, I usually describe the coalition model as think about a big R1 where you have a college of arts and sciences, a college of education, a college of engineering, but there's one shared graduate school. That is sort of what we've set up here, where there can be an Otterbein in Ohio, and there can be another kind of Otterbein-like school in other states across the nation. And Antioch is our shared graduate school. So we are specializing, and that helps our faculty focus on what we know we do best, which is we have great graduate programs, don't get me wrong, but adults want to have different models than just one night a week in person. And that is the way our faculty need to teach because of all the other demands on their time. And so this allows us to use Antioch's complementary pedagogy for adult learners and Otterbein for undergrad, and each do what we do really well and do it together. Mission is central too. We couldn't do this if we didn't believe in the same purpose for higher education for our institutions.
I
Yeah,
love that sort of idea of puzzle pieces and that it's complementary
Mhm.
and that's the way that you've developed it. I mean, that's a terrific way to visualize what Antioch and Otterbein are doing. So
it's how we can scale what we're doing. I mean, the whole thing is about growth eventually, right? And we believe in mission, that's central, as Wendy said, but it's a growth model. Okay, so we have a shared services operation that saves a little money and so forth, like many places. That's not the principal idea here. That's a marginal business. It really is, how do we do growth? And one of the things that when we first talked to our friends at Otterbein, we noticed they had, as Wendy said, some very good graduate programs, particularly in nursing and health professions and so forth. But they had no capacity to scale them, right? The they weren't doing a lot of remote distance kinds of instruction. We're scattered all over the country, and because of our capacity on the technology, we actually live on Zoom kind of days. That was really gave us a big lift during COVID, frankly. We did really well during COVID because we know how to do this. But the change was prior to COVID, we had about 75% of our instruction was done on a campus basis, and we had 5 campuses in various places. After COVID, that's flipped. It's only about 25%. We still do, there's some programs you would need to do face-to-face, and we do that. But the capacity to be able to do things at a distance and be able to take Otterbein's really excellent nursing program, for example, and be able to distribute them, do them out of a place like Seattle, et cetera, enables us to increase the scale in ways we could, they couldn't do, we couldn't do. It has to be together.
Well, I have about 1,000 questions here that come to mind, and this is out of the box thinking. I know that's one of those common buzzwords that you hear, it's out of the box. This one's out of the box. I don't remember this model really being used. And frankly, probably my first question with this, and I have three I'd like to ask you. What was the main challenge in creating this coalition? I mean, it doesn't look like you had a model, quote unquote, to follow, fill in the blank type of thing. Wendy, why don't you start it from your side, then Chet, you next.
I think, well, I mean, even small colleges are averse to change, right? Because people know what they know. And when you're suddenly introducing everyone to a new colleague, there's suspicion. And because the language around partnership in higher ed oftentimes is about, somebody's department is going to disappear and this one is going away and we're going to eliminate jobs. There, I think a main challenge is how do you communicate with people in a way that is positive and shows all of the potential for this and gets over the fear. And so I think you really just have to be honest and persistent is sort of how we've approached this. We've brought people together so that they can meet each other, develop that. A lot of the things, the initiatives that we've undertaken came from grassroots, from faculty talking to faculty saying, oh, hey, and could we do this? Okay, great. Let's think about that too. So there has to be clear communication. There has to be trust. Chet and I have to model for everyone that we can trust each other and that when one of us benefits, the other one benefits. This isn't an either or. This is both and. And so we have to work together in this way. And that is very different and not what is the norm in a highly competitive environment like higher education. So to me, it's that communicating something different culturally that is a big challenge.
Yeah. Chet, let me follow up a little bit on
Yep.
your side of it. Besides the challenges of creating the coalition, tell me about the stakeholder buy-in. I mean, that's usually one of the most difficult aspects of any type of new modeling system, whatever it is. I mean, from your point of view, was that difficult? And, how did you guys navigate that?
Well, I could talk about the Antioch side of the street. I mean, because we started as an institution before COVID, as like Wendy and Otterbein did, to say, what are our options? Okay. How do we not only sustain ourselves financially, but how do we grow over time and do the kinds of things we wanted to do? So we were constrained, as I said, not much of an endowment, et cetera, et cetera. when we decided that we didn't have the money to really invest in growth in either existing programs or new programs, we then turned to this whole model and we set up a committee that was members of the board, members of the faculty, members of the administration. We all signed NDAs. We went through the whole thing, did a lot of work, a lot of homework, there was a lot of internal communication about what we were up to. And I think that really helped a lot. People were sort of skeptical that we would be able to pull it off. I think most of our folks at Antioch, faculty and staff, see this as the future of the institution. And so trying to figure out
Chet, yeah, let me just add into that. When did this, as you're talking about this, and Wendy, when did this start? I mean, when did this process really start in earnest? I guess would be the best way to say that. Chet?
well, we both started separately just before COVID, slightly different timeframes. As Wendy said, they were talking to some other folks about different things. We went through an elaborate process of getting down to some target institutions and then having meetings with people. And I mean, it took a lot of effort and a lot of work. We really liked Otterbein, but they were in a different time frame, as Wendy can explain. So it wasn't until 22
We,
sometime,
yeah,
right?
we talked preliminarily in maybe spring and summer of 21,
Yeah,
then sort of went different ways, then started talking again end of 21, beginning of 22.
yeah,
We went public with an announcement in July of 22,
Right.
and then spent a year working together publicly until we could close the transaction in June of 23. Yeah, and to get the buy-in on our side, we had also non-disclosure agreements. We have two faculty and two students who are full voting members of our Board of Trustees. So we had the faculty and student trustees, cabinet sort of slowly expanding. Once we knew that it would involve we involved the assembly heads. We have a faculty assembly, a student government, and a staff assembly. We involved them in updates and feedback. We did some market research without using names, like testing the principle of this. Would prospective students and then would alumni and faculty and staff be in favor of this kind of partnership? So we did all of that in kind of a due diligence phase and just brought wider and wider circles of people to be involved and give us feedback until we felt like we were confident enough to go public and then work wholeheartedly on the close.
Very
and
good.
I mean, there was the close, which is really complicated with the accreditors because they didn't understand the
Yeah,
model either.
yeah.
HLC, to their credit, finally figured it out. But it seems to me the other piece in all of this is as Wendy said, you're building on relationships.
Mhm.
It is very complicated, and we're scattered all over the country, literally.
Mhm.
It's particularly complicated. And there's a lot of things you can't do on Zoom, and it comes down to that. And so you have to engage a lot of energy with your lawyers, with your creditors, with all your lead people, and you have to bring folks along. Our folks came along, I think, because they really did understand the fragility of private nonprofit institutions in this environment, and they saw what was happening to other institutions, and they didn't want to get absorbed by somebody else, and they didn't want to go under, et cetera. So there was a certain amount of buy-in, not so much out of fear, but being prudent about the future.
Our listeners will be so excited to hear about this sort of combination of capacity that Otterbein found a partner that had existing capacity that was scalable. That I'm sure is exciting. But I also know our listeners will be very interested in financial implications and the sustainability. I mean, both of you came together with those things in mind. So we recognize that this is early on, but are there things that you can share about the implications, both financial sustainability of both institutions?
Wendy, you ought to talk about pathways for a second, because I think
Okay.
that's a big thing, and then I can
Yeah.
follow with some of the other stuff.
Sure, we were just talking about this morning. Chet's visiting me at Otterbein this week, and so we were just talking about that this morning. So we One of the things that we did with Antioch as Otterbein's graduate school, we have new opportunities for our students. For example, we in the past did not have graduate programs in counseling and psychology, and now we do. And so we worked faculty to faculty. In the state of Ohio, students are allowed to take 9 credit hours of graduate coursework as undergrads that can double count towards both degrees. And so we started creating very intentionally these pathways that our Otterbein students can apply to be to take 9 credits of Antioch graduate courses in their senior year and get a jump start on their master's programs. And what we were hearing is a report from our Otterbein psychology chair that they're seeing huge interest and growing enrollments in our undergraduate class. And they're hearing anecdotally, we haven't studied this systematically, that these pathways to graduate programs at Antioch are making a big difference. Last year was the very first year that we rolled this out, kind of late. We had, I think we have 4 or 5 students this year that are in these Antioch classes as seniors. Next year, so far already, we have 12 students who have applied and been accepted to take these classes. And so we just keep hearing that from students who are enrolling. Otterbein's enrollment is flat because we've been planning our graduate students going away, but we're up in undergraduate students. And that is one of the questions that we get most often from prospective students and parents is tell us more about these. We call them GEEPs, graduate early admission pathways. Tell us more about these pathways. And we keep adding them. I think we have 15 pathways now and a couple more that are under development.
Yeah, I think it's so, and that model is very attractive to us at Antioch
Mhm.
because it's growth for both Otterbein, and then these students end up coming, or a big chunk of them end up coming to us. And in both cases, it's almost no additional marginal expense. So it's a plus plus all the way across. That's a really good thing. It also expands our reach. I mean, if people get to know us as being tied into this kind of model, it's particularly important as we talk about expansion, which we can, how we go to number 3, number 4, et cetera, which we're in the process of doing, which we can talk about. So there is this importance of the undergraduate operation that basically helps everybody. Okay. Then at the graduate level, because we have taken over these graduate programs from Otterbein, particularly the nursing and health professions, we created a graduate school of nursing and health professions. We had nothing of the sort prior, but we hired a dean. We've hired some of the senior nursing people from Otterbein as our sort of associate deans and some faculty who are running programs. That's up and going. We can see very easily how that expands over time. So there's that whole growth, and there's growth in the other smaller programs as well. So, and we have some elaborate models inside about, okay, how's the revenue get shared and the growth. I mean, that's complicated stuff, but everybody does come out ahead. The other
Uh,
piece, I think,
oh,
and I'm
we're
sorry, I just
probably
want
going
to
to say the
finish.
same thing. Yeah.
Well, I was going to talk about the investment.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I mean, one of the things that made this work is that Otterbein in its division took a little bit of money out of their basically endowed
Unrestricted
fund
net
under,
assets. Yep. Hmm.
and created an investment fund, which is paying for some of this. It's the investment fund we didn't have. So
Hmm.
is that for us, it was access to revenue or access to resources that are now will eventually get repaid in a variety of ways.
Mm.
But it was an important step forward for them in terms of their board's commitment
Hmm.
to this model. They were willing to put money where their mouth was, kind of thing.
Hmm. I was just going to say because Otterbein, has lots of ties to our community. We think of ourselves,
Yeah.
many small colleges do, as an anchor institution. We make our community better. We have relationships. We've been able to, so now Westerville, Otterbein's campus is an additional location for Antioch, and they've been able to bring their school counselor programs here, their CMHC programs, their EDD programs here, and we can now introduce our community partners to Antioch's programs. And when Antioch grows, then Otterbein grows, right? We are benefiting together. So all of that is part of the growth and financial sustainability model.
And there's one other piece to it, which I would give credit to President John Comerford, the Otterbein president, who's been focused on the
Mm,
local community here
hmm hmm
and was always in the position of going out and talk to the head of a company or head of an organization, and they would say, "Hey, could you do X?" And Otterbein just didn't have the capacity to do it
hmm
because of the model and so forth. We already had a setup for that. We had staffing for that, and so we call them strategic partnerships. But we have relationships that we're building together, large and small, with big operations like Ohio Health or big operations like Nationwide Children's Hospital, and all sorts of tiny little NGOs that nobody outside of Columbus ever heard of. But it is not only community development, or John Comerford would say workforce development, okay? It is revenue streams tied to this, which is
hmm
also important. And it's very tied to mission. It's service to the community. And that plays out in a variety of ways. And we're doing that in other locations, but the biggest chunk of it is right here in Central Ohio.
Well, let's kind of keep going down this path a little bit. We're starting to get a sense of how this started and a little bit of the progress. I suppose the question that comes to mind, is it meeting your expectations? Is it meeting where you started this path in really 2022 when you started really announcing it? Now it's the beginning of 2025. So you've got a couple of years under your belt. Is it meeting the expectations? Has there been that surprise? Talk to me a little bit about that. Oh, you're both
Well,
giggling. This must be
it,
good. I'm ready.
no, it does. I think it meets our expectations and exceeds our expectations. It's very exciting. I mean, yeah, it's innovative, it's creative, it's all those good things, et cetera. And it's a nice counterpoint to the sort of normal day-to-day stuff that provosts have to deal with in a regular institution. So you get that sort of stuff. I think it's also exciting because we all believe in higher education and the importance of higher education, and this is a contribution to it. So that's how I would respond to that kind of question.
Wendy, how about you? I mean, has there been surprises? And I don't mean bad or good. I'm just kind
Yeah,
of
sure.
curious. Yeah. So talk a little bit
Always.
about that. Yeah.
Always. I mean, there is no way, that you could possibly plan out day by day anything as complex as this, right? So I think if something frustrates me, it's just how long things take. The
Mm.
due diligence phase, always longer than you think. The specialized accreditation is a whole complex Gantt chart of this approval has to come before this approval. Some things surprised us. I thought that some Otterbein faculty who really love working with graduate students would be drawn to working at Antioch, but I wasn't sure about that. And I think they were uncertain. So, as Chet said, several Otterbein faculty have in fact moved over to Antioch to lead graduate programs there. And that was a happy surprise. I love that continuity and that we can talk across institutions in a way that really does keep all of our faculty connected in positive direction. So I'm really pleased with that. We're offering a travel course jointly. We have an Otterbein biology professor, an environmental studies professor from Antioch taking undergrad and grad students to the Galapagos together. So all of these new ways that faculty are seeing for their own collaborations. Imagine, faculty suddenly double the number of colleagues that they have, and that's a real win-win, I think, for both institutions. So that's a happy kind of surprise
Good.
with this partnership.
And just to follow on that, the doubling of professional relationships among particularly the senior administrators,
Yeah.
right? Normally a provost doesn't have anybody to talk to, right? And so
Speak for
I've got
yourself, Chet.
I've got somebody to talk to.
Wendy, you used a great term, and I know our listeners are going to hear this and they're going to be thinking the win-win. But the way that you've been describing this, there's win, win, win. I mean,
Mm,
there's
mm,
so much great stuff happening Given the pressures that many small colleges face, do you see this model as a viable alternative for other colleges? And I guess the other thing that I'm sure our listeners will be wondering, are there plans to expand the coalition? You've been breakthrough trailblazers here, and what does the future of the coalition look like? You've done the heavy lifting in working with HLC and the accreditation, and there's at least a pathway now. So I think Dean and I are curious, what's the future look like?
It's, as I said at the outset, it's not a bilateral deal. It's a multilateral deal. And we are in active discussions right now with one other institution and exploring with a couple of other institutions. These institutions look a lot like Otterbein. That won't surprise you. They're good, high quality undergraduate traditional institutions. They may or may not have much in the way of graduate programs, and they're in different locations. So they're not in Ohio. They're not where we are, trying to spread the map here. But there is a lot of interest. On the other hand, it's not for everybody, because institutions that are in extremis financially, we won't be able to save them. Okay. And there are a lot of institutions that think they're, sort of sitting fat and happy with big endowments, which I would question, but that's the model there. And so it is not for everybody.
Mm.
It takes a lot of work, a lot of commitment, and a lot of vision, frankly, on the part of boards, especially boards and presidents and so forth and so on.
Mhm. I think you said it well, Chet. I would echo those comments. I'm actually really excited to introduce new members to the coalition. I think that's again, I feel impatient about that particular step and looking forward to when we can publicly talk about some new members.
So
Great.
are we getting close on that, or is there something news
No,
breaking in
Not
the
close
near
enough.
future?
Not
No.
close enough for me,
well,
but
no, one of our,
we're
we both
working on
talked
it.
about frustration. We've had some very serious conversations with another institution. That would be
Mhm.
great, et
Mhm.
cetera. And the next step would be for Wendy and I to go talk to their academic leadership about their
Mhm.
programs and so on and so on. We're sort of waiting for that to happen.
Well, well, your phones might be ringing after this. I think
Come
just
on.
Happy to
given
talk to people.
the nature of this conversation and the the way that you've described what you've been able to do, I think that courageous boards and courageous institutions are going to look for models like this and are going to be more open to breakthrough practices because many small colleges need to do that at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our leadership, President Comerford and Chancellor Bill Groves from Antioch, they go to all the regular conferences and other kinds of meetings, and they're always getting talked to by people or asked about exactly the same sort of thing. People know
Mm.
there's a lot of interest, and some of those interested parties have filtered into our sort of pool of potential candidates.
But,
We'd love to talk to anybody. So,
right. Well, time is pretty much run out, and we need to probably wrap things up,
okay.
because I do know this is a fascinating subject, and you're right, we really could talk hours about that. And I suspect after you get some more calls, we may be doing a follow-up show on you going, so how's this going? What's new going on? But look, I want to thank both of you for sharing your insights and your contributions to the world of higher education. Like I said, you're really moving out there, and this is fascinating stuff, and it looks promising. It looks very promising. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about the series, Small College America, visit our website at www.smallcollegeamerica.transistor.fm. I know it's not your everyday sort of website, but you can find it. We'll find you. And you can find out more about the details on this episode. We'll have a transcript as well as the audio broadcast. And we do that with also all the other future shows that are going on. So anybody who's also listening, we're always open to suggestions, and we'd like to hear your comments. And once again, for Kent and myself, I want to thank you. And look, thank you very much. Good luck, and let's keep in touch. We want to see what goes on with this great idea.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate the
you.
opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.